Everybody, and thanks for joining us here today on this webinar. We have joining us the CEO of Cleantech Water, Mr. Willem Friesendorp, who is with us live from Beijing, and he'll give us all an update on the announcement from earlier this week on some of the projects that the company is working on. I'm going to hand it over to you now, Willem, and let you take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So I'm delighted to give an update on the projects. There's a bit too many projects to go in detail for each of those, but I will touch upon what I think are some of the most relevant and interesting updates. Let me share my screen. I assume that succeeded. Otherwise, Peter, I assume you will let me know. So before I start, just a very quick recap on the company, just for those who haven't seen that yet. And then I will dive into some of the specific projects. So the goal was really to give an update on the project status, but also through that update, perhaps to give some background and color on the type of projects we do, the type of markets we target, and the kind of bits and the kind of benefits we bring to customers. So quick background, as many of you know, but just to recap that again, we recently demerged from Sunrise Energy Metals. The reason for that demerger was really that we were ready to grow, to start the growth phase. And the reason for that was that we delivered our first large-scale project successfully. And on the back of that, we really started the growth phase, and we have started this growth phase. And then it made sense to us at the time to then create two separate companies, because developing a mine is really very different from developing a water business. And that's where we are today. Quick on the strategy, shared this a few times before, very high level, we really are looking to build on our portfolio of unique solutions. They're really quite different from anything that's out there, from many of the solutions we have. And based on that, we see a lot of potential. We do see a lot of demand in the market. And with our solutions that we've developed, we entering certain high growth sectors and are focused on establishing a market share in those sectors. And then finally, our business model at the moment is very much these integrated technology solutions. So that's integrated equipment, usually, but over time, we will then build up an installed base. And on that installed base, we will continue to sell consumables. So there's a recurring business coming with almost every plant we deliver. And then there's the potential for BOOT. So that's that you build the plant and then you sell water as a service, where you basically get paid per ton you treat or per ton of clean water you deliver. That's a little bit in the future. Right now, we're really focused on the business of selling our technology solutions, which in itself is an attractive business. So it's not something we want to move away from. It's just part of a bigger picture in terms of the longer term growth. Then two more slides on the background. So one is our focus. I just mentioned that we are focused on a number of high growth sectors where our technology are particularly applicable. And in the case examples and in the projects I will discuss in a bit, you will see those sectors. So I will re-mention them again. But they're basically these three that you're looking at. So one is industrial brine treatment. Brines are the big problem in industrial treatment these days. Brines are itself polluted, very hard to treat. And brine is also the area where you get most opportunity to further increase the sustainability of an industrial treatment plant. So you see companies, especially multinationals, they really want to get to this 100% recycling. So minimize extraction of water from the environment. And you do that by attacking the brines that are right now still being sent to the river or to the sea. Then the second one is municipal effluent reuse. That's the market where you have municipal wastewater treatment plants. And instead of putting that water into the environment, you actually treat it further to make it suitable for reuse, especially for industry. Another very big market that's growing that we're very interested in and have developed specific solutions and technologies for. And then finally, mining. It's a little bit where we come from. So mining is in itself an interesting sector. Obviously now with high metal prices, it's growing fast. And the pressure on water in many of these mining sites is very substantial. And the pressure to minimize or even limit any impact on the environment to zero is very high. And our solutions are geared towards that market. Then before I dive into the projects, one slide on a slightly different part of the company, but important to mention. That's Pneumatic. Pneumatic is a subsidiary 100% owned by Cleantech. There's a different approach. It's purely focused on developing a membrane, a graphene membrane, which is a new generation membrane, that we're hoping to launch in the upcoming period. So it's not yet at the moment commercial, but hopefully it will be soon. And it's part of our company that before I now go back to the project, I thought I should mention for everybody listening for the first time. Then the project. So this is really what the update is about. So some of the projects you might have heard recently because we've announced them, but some you might have not heard from for a while. So we decided that it's a good idea to give an update on the main ones. So these are the projects that we've signed up and partly delivered over the last couple of years. So that's really the new business we started. They're very focused on the three sectors I just mentioned. So on the top left, you see the three projects we've handed over. For some, we're still working with the customer on further support. For other ones, it's really the customer that's completely operating it separately or independently from us. But for all three, we're having one way or the other still linkages to the project. If nothing else, it is by providing the resins, top-ups, or the spare parts, or just the general support. So these three projects were really for us as well, a big milestone, and in fact, a big driver for the demerger that I mentioned before, because they showed to us, but especially also to our investors and our stakeholders and our customers, that the benefits that our technology can provide can really be materialized, can really be implemented and shown to work in practice. And that's been also the basis for our further growth. So these projects remain very, very important. I think for a company like us, when you really commercialize new technologies, getting those first plants up and running is very, very essential, and very much the first step to then go into faster growth. So besides these three, there's now another 5 that are in some progress into further implementation. The most recent one on the right lower corner, I will talk a little bit more about that later. And as size, you see varying sizes. It's often a question I'm getting, like how big are typical projects? The typical project is 1 to 5 million. That's also what we focus on. It fits our technology very well, that size, and many plants and projects around the world need technology solutions that have this size. That's not to say that there are much bigger projects out there. And bigger projects meaning 10 million plus, 20 million plus, 30 million plus even. So you have the very big ones. If you get even bigger than that, then you're more in the space of very general, very large integrated plants. So say a very large industrial development would need an integrated water treatment plant. That can sometimes be 100, 200 million, right? In those cases, we would be more likely looking to partner, because we're never really looking to provide standard solutions, or we're not looking to become or compete with general EPC companies or engineering companies. We're really looking to those places where our specific solution provides a solution to the customer that is much better than what's out there at the moment. So then there's opportunity to ask questions. So as I mentioned, I will pick a few projects to talk more about, but feel free to submit questions and then I can answer them at the end. Final thing on the projects, because obviously for a lot of investors, growth is an important point. So we don't do forecasts. This is simply showing the projects we have signed up over the last 5 years or so, when we really reoriented and refocused on making the water business into a separate business. And you see a lot of the sign up and a lot of the new projects have happened in the last 7-8 months. And that's not a coincidence. That is very much as a result of us building a commercial team, which in itself was a result of us delivering the first successful large-scale projects. So that's both ourselves that then pushed it, but obviously also customers that suddenly came to us and said, hey, we see you have a solution there that's interesting for us. Let's talk. So that's what we've seen, and we're obviously hoping to continue this trend going forward. So now a few specific projects. This is one. This project is started at the beginning of this year. It's for nitrate removal. some of the presentation I've mentioned nitrate quite a few times. It's because nitrate is a big challenge. And it's a good example of the type of market we focus on. It is both a challenge where existing solutions don't work very well, and it's a challenge where there's a lot of increasing demand recently, driven by regulation and driven by underlying nitrate concentrations that are going up. And that's because of decades of agricultural use in many places around the world, really, but very much including Australia, New Zealand, the US, China, where the underlying nitrate concentration is going up. It's also ammonia, by the way, and a little bit of phosphate, but there are better solutions for those two areas. So we are actually providing solutions there as well. But the big item right now and the big challenge for many of those places is nitrate specifically. So that's why we are there. And then we have specific solutions. One is Bionex. Bionex is very good in polishing that last amount of nitrate out of the water. And in water treatment, the two challenging areas, very generally speaking, is when it's very polluted, so when concentrations are very high, but also when it's already very, very low, there's often a challenge to bring it down to zero or to very close to zero. So this is the project that we started. It's in northern China. So northern China is becoming a big market. The government has for a while now identified, especially the area around the Yellow River, as a high priority area to improve the environment, especially reduce the nutrient, which then in practice especially means nitrate, because the others are a little bit easier to remove. And the existing solutions out there are not good enough to reach the low levels that are required. So the only option companies would have these days is, or governments would have these days, would be to do RO, so reverse osmosis, that takes out almost everything. But that would be very expensive and would create a brine. And then that brine contains nitrate. So it's sort of moving the problem from one direction to the other. So our solution doesn't rely on membranes. We rely on resins and then on our BioCleanse. I won't go into detail into these projects. You can check them on the website. But what we effectively do is we destroy the nitrate. So it becomes a nitrogen gas. And then that means that it's almost purely clean solution with very, very little brine and very little impact on the environment, and also very low cost. We hope to install this by the end of the year. And then the market is indeed all these areas that are sensitive. So areas that, again, not only in China, but also, for example, in Australia and New Zealand, where rivers have high nutrient concentration that need to be lowered, and where our solution can help to lower that by treating effluent from point sources around those river basins. Second one, that's one of the first projects, but still worth mentioning because we just finalized the warranty period. So if anyone would have any remaining doubts of the reliability and the benefit of our technology, that should, in this specific case at least, have been largely addressed. So the plant has been operating for the full year, operated by the customer, and then reliably removing the pollutants that were in the waste. So this is mining wastewater. And this is a true ZLD solution. So they make sure that no water enters the environment after treatment. So some of the water is then being reused, and there's also a membrane there for really the high quality upgrade. But the ultimate goal of this water is to be re-injected. And in order to be allowed to be re-injected, you need to treat it. And that then gives a very low cost, zero liquid discharge solution. That, as I said, has been operating for the last year and is still very much a flagship project for us. That if it wasn't for COVID, we would hope to show many people around the world. So the market potential here is mining, obviously. So other mining projects that have similar challenges with tailings or with brine ponds that they need to get rid of, or that they don't even want to start, because governments are obviously getting very sensitive to those things. And secondly, it's just generally produced water. So one of the reasons these waters are complex to treat and you need a plant like this to properly treat it is just because in some groundwater there's a lot of random stuff. And then a mining process creates even more pollution, like sulfates and heavy metals. And then to treat that, you need an advanced plant without cost blowing up. So our DSLX solution is very suitable for that. This is interesting to mention that we recently signed. So this is with our partner Nesser. So Nesser is a listed company in the US that has been prioritized environmental solutions for their end users. So their end users are the big oil companies, both the international oil majors, but also the local large local oil companies, oil and gas companies, obviously in the Middle East. And they've identified this area as a big growth area. So although the oil sector overall might not be as hot as it once was, the drive and the pressure to reduce environmental impact is still very, very large. So that means that water solutions within those sectors still are seeing a lot of increasing demand and growth. And what you see is multinationals, I think for a long time, there was always the discussion, why are people improving their water treatment, right? Is it purely regulation driven or is it also sustainability? And I think we've now been seeing the switch to, of course, economics matter. And of course, regulations still matter a lot, but you do see the bigger oil companies, but a lot of the bigger multinationals now being themselves very driven to reduce their footprint. So that's reduce their CO2 footprint and also obviously their water footprint. And this is a very good example of that. The existing technology is relatively straightforward. You use membranes. You put the water, you take bore water, you put it through membranes, and then you inject it back into oil wells. So this is to enhance oil recovery. So, but in order to have that effect, you tend to, in this case at least, you tend to add salt to it to get the right density of that water. So you treat the water, then you add a lot of salt to it, and then you inject it back into the environment. So our solution is very substantially better than what exists at the moment. Instead of having this low recovery, so having more brine than you actually have water that you wanted to produce, we have a high recovery solution. So we actually waste much less of the water you pump up from the bore. And then also we create much less brine you have to dispose of. And finally, from our first treatment step, we create our own brine, but instead of then disposing of that, we clean it and we take the sodium chloride, and it's mostly sodium chloride, out of that brine and add it to the water. So we also save a large amount of chemicals in this process. So, and then finally, because you have such a higher result, so you have so much more water that you produce from one treatment plant, you will also be able to reduce energy footprint, so CO2 footprint very substantially. So it's benefits all across. The capex is higher, but then the payback time is very, very quick. So we see this as just one of many, and we plan to install this. So we already started the manufacturing process. The goal is to have this delivered by Q1 in the next year. So that's very quick. And then finally, the project I'm probably getting most questions on, and that's because we announced this a while ago. This is the Hyrox project in Townsville, where we won the tender. That's been a while ago. That's been, again, we announced that, the council announced that. So what has happened since is that we've started the detailed design and we ordered the long lead items. And what has happened since is that we're waiting for the negotiation of the final contract, so the real contract for which we did the detailed design. And that has been waiting and is still waiting the finalization of the negotiations of the council with their end users. So what we create here is very clean water. So this is the second sector I mentioned at the start. This is the municipal effluent reuse. So instead of sending the municipal effluent to sea, you actually treat it, upgrade it, so that it can be used by industrial customers within Townsville, in the environment. And we won that, but now these discussions have to be finalized. So these end users need to be specific, and the council and the end user need to have a specific agreement for each of those end users, saying how much water do you need, by what time, and what water quality does it need to have. So we're obviously not involved in those discussions, but we're in touch with the council. And the moment they have clarified and specified and probably signed all those end users, we are ready then to finalize our contract negotiations with the council to implement this project. So the market potential is enormous. It's global as well. So it's not only in Australia where this is important, but also the US and Southern Europe. Basically any place where there's a shortage of water, you should be looking at municipal effluent and upgrading it. So we see this as a very important milestone for our company as well. On top of that, it's a large size project. So 16 million is obviously a good size revenue for a company like us. And then finally on the pipeline, so we don't provide forecasts on our pipeline. I can just tell everybody that there is a very healthy pipeline. So on the back of the project and on the back of the building of the commercial team that we've done, you know, have a very diverse pipeline of many projects, hundreds of potential projects that are all in different phases of development, right? So some are in early phases, others are later phase. And I think it's important again to emphasize, as shown in an earlier slide as well, how initial growth leads to more growth. And that's for multiple reasons, just mentioned 4 here. One is every time you enter a sector, whether that's oil and gas or whether that's a certain industry. So we're focused on industrial brine, but within there, you have consumer goods and you have other areas. Every time you enter a sector like that or a region, you will have the potential to have more follow-ups because you have leaders and you have people who are more following or companies that are more following. So you reach those new users almost automatically when you have your project installed. And then you have a multinational customer. So you have customers with many sites around the world. So the same story there, right? If you have a first project, you can have a multiple project much quicker because you're now talking to the end user that has multiple applications within their own company. Then a second reason why growth is accelerating is the conversion time reduces. So you saw that with the first few projects, they took quite a bit more time, largely because of testing requirements and piloting requirements. And that can be reduced once you have projects up and running, because you can take the potential customer to the existing plant. They can talk to them. So there's a lot of ways in which you can then reduce the conversion time. And then project size can increase. So the typical project size is a couple of million, but certainly the larger projects become available more and more the more presence you have in a certain sector or a certain market. And then finally, which is almost automatically happening, is that with every installed project, we tend to have repeat business on the back of it. And the benefit of that is obviously it is very cumulative because these repeat business tends to go on for many years. So in the back, we will slowly be increasing the underlying revenues with every project we install. So this concludes my introduction of the projects and a deep dive into a few. So I'm happy now to take questions.
Thanks, Willem. And a good deep dive it was. And I think the first question we have here follows on a little bit from your summary. And that is, can you please give us some color on the competitive landscape that CNQ or Cleantech operates in?
Yeah, that's always sorry, there's an echo. Yeah, thank you. It's a hard one to answer because it's so diverse. So the water treatment market and the water technology market is still very non-consolidated. The biggest companies are a few percentage of the total market. And we see that, so that means that we have different competitors in all of the sectors we operate. So there are a few companies out there that are also quite focused on mining. So we see them when we're focused on our mining sector. But if you go to Municipal, depending on the size, you meet a lot of different companies. So you meet local ones and you meet international ones. So that's not a great answer because it's so dependent, but it's a full range. And I would say, secondly, more often than not, it's more the discussion with the customer directly that's relevant for us than the competition, because our technology solution tends to be quite different. So it's much more for us to have the discussion with the customer early and be able to say, listen, there's just a number of problems we structurally solve, like the production of brine, or a number of robustness factors that are just substantially different. And then it's much more a customer discussion directly than that we're saying, these are our competitors. And in fact, last thing on this, very often the larger water treatment companies, so the integrators, are our partners. They're hardly ever our competitors. So they are very interested often to take our solution and integrate it into one of their bigger projects.
Well, that leads into the second question that one of our listeners has submitted. Can Cleantech's water treatment projects work in conjunction with other water treatment projects, for instance, FOSLOC?
Yeah, very much. Be specific on one. I think FOSLOC is less so because I think at least when I followed it, Voslak was more on the cleaning up of lakes, say, or of big water bodies. We're not in that sector at the moment, so it's less logical. That specific example is less logical, but in general, the answer is a clear yes. It happens, but it happens very rarely that we're really a one-to-one competing solution. I would say the municipal effluent reuse is probably a bit more competitive, so there's more companies out there that would want to put their own solution forward than, say, the nitrate removal solution, where we're very special, so where you would really look at partnering.
Okay. The next question is, what is your general target margin overall per $10 million, for example, in revenue? What would you expect the general margins to be? And is there a higher margin depending on whether it's a Desalex, Hyrox, or Bionex plant?
Yes, so our specific margins for specific projects are confidential, and also our specific margins for products are confidential. In general, I think you can look at industry reports, etc., to understand our margins. The type of margin we're chasing is very much advanced equipment margins, which is, say, 30, 40, sometimes even higher %, because there's quite a lot of R&D. So when you deliver that, you expect higher margins. Our projects can be integrations between somewhat standard pre-treatment, say, and the picture everybody might be looking at is exactly that. So on the left side, you see the advanced equipment where we would be looking at high margins. That's very much our IP, where we provide so substantial benefits to the customer that it justifies these higher margins. Whereas if it's more standard, the right side of the picture, more standard sedimentation or removal of pollutants, we follow industry. And industry tends then to have, say, 20-25% margin on those types of equipment, sometimes lower, sometimes a bit higher.
Right, so, and okay, yep, sorry.
No, that's the answer.
Following on, dovetailing into that nicely is the next question. What do you think is generally the length of your typical sales cycle?
I would say average, it's still perhaps, say, 8 months or something. But there are plenty of them that are shorter, and some of them are much larger, much longer. So that's why this average is so long. I think the Townsville is an example where you have obviously a long cycle. There's some very big mining projects where you get in at pre-feasibility. So then by definition, you get a sales cycle of 3-4 years. So they increase the average. But I would say the medium, so most projects going forward should have a sales cycle of, say, 3 to 5 months. So still relatively quick.
Yes, and I should have prefaced that by with one of your last comments of saying there are hundreds of opportunities out there, and the pipeline is pretty large and diverse. Okay, well, I have one last question here, which is probably interesting given your location. How's business going for you in China in terms of dealing with government and your authorities, given they're an Australian company, and the perception lately that there's a little bit of interest in that Australian companies operating in China?
Yes, so I would say surprisingly little impact so far. I can't say it's helping. So apparently Australia is on a list, is lowest on the list of companies to invest in, but we're not looking at investments right now in China. Technology cooperation is still fine because we're actually having these conversations, and they sometimes have to do the official request to their top management saying, hey, this is an Australian company. And so far, it always comes back positive. It's saying, no, technology is fine. And in fact, China is right now encouraging foreign companies to, technology-wise, to come to China and work with Chinese companies. So I think there's a lot of misinformation on China. You have these blacklist and not investment list, etc. You have those, but water treatment is certainly not one of them. So on balance, I would say little impact, but I would welcome better relations. It would always help, obviously.
Well, perhaps you just go in with a heavy Dutch accent and pretend you're from somewhere else.
Exactly.
Okay, well, that's the end of our questions there. If anybody has any other questions they'd like to engage with Willem directly, send them to me, peter@nwrcommunications.com.au, or directly to Willem. I think his email address is at the bottom of most announcements as well. So I'll say thank you to everybody who's taken the time to join the very informative discussion here today. And Willem, thanks for dialing in, and we look forward to hearing from you again soon.
Great. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everybody.